The Lifestyle Show, presented by Selina MacKenzie.
Clinical psychologist Dr. Anna Colton joins us now, and we're going to discuss the relationship with food and how children can have a more positive relationship with eating. It's great to have you on the show with us, Anna.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Now, I know your book is sort of aimed at 0 to 16-year-olds. I worry in this day and age, my kids are all grown up now, but in this day and age, I don't think I would know the difference between just being a fussy eater, which a child generally is, or having an eating disorder. Is there a massive difference?
There is a real difference between being a fussy eater and an eating disorder. And there are also a number of different eating disorders. So, which one you have also depends on your symptoms. But there may be less of a difference between being fussy and having kind of disordered eating. An eating disorder is a psychiatric diagnosable illness, and you have to meet certain criteria. Fussy eating is a stage that young children go through often, but not always. And it is certainly also true that today society kind of is set up to enable disordered eating, with a lot of the beliefs that come from diet culture and a lot of the communications about the value of thinness and the fact that it is believed that we can control our weight, shape and size through diet and exercise alone, and that it's our personal responsibility to do so.
And can we not tailor our weight through diet and exercise alone?
Often not. No, there are all sorts of factors. And actually even that conversation detracts from the fact that really we are all born as intuitive eaters. Excuse me. So, babies come out and they feed as much as they need and then they stop. And that is how we are wired. And what tends to change that is communications from society, communications from parents, beliefs, anxieties around food, stress, tension, and the kind of intergenerational transmission of disordered eating and the societal discourse around food, eating, weight and shape.
Is there a lot to do with genetics?
There is some genetics involved. There is heritability in a number of areas: physical health, our microbiome, our mental health. So yes, there are genetic factors at play as well.
And I get what you're saying. It must be an awful time to be a child or a teenager because of, social media. Everyone's competing to look their best and look slim, etc. But I also think you're correct in the fact that we can blame so many things now, intolerances and allergies and IBS and things that weren't around certainly when I was a teenager.
Absolutely. And actually, as parents, when we have children, we will have our own beliefs and our own anxieties and our own issues with food. And unless we are aware of them, we'll communicate them verbally or non-verbally or just through our behaviours to our children, and then they will pick them up. And that is how we pass it on, even unwittingly, without knowing. And yes, there are all sorts of reasons, as you say. But again, with intolerances, with allergies, with beliefs around intermittent fasting, which is actually a way of restricting food intake, there are so many different reasons to kind of manipulate your food and not eat intuitively nowadays.
Yeah. I suppose an example of what you said would be mummy's on a diet, so she can't have much to eat. I suppose to a child, they're going to think about that, aren't they?
Well, that is a really tricky communication, because it communicates that actually you can manipulate your shape and size by restricting your food. It communicates that there's a lot of value in how you look. And actually, we want children to grow up with self-worth that comes from who they are as people, not how they look aesthetically. And so with those kind of very direct communications, mummy's on a diet, she can't eat that, are really tricky. And they, particularly when they're at a young age and a child doesn't know any different, can't challenge it, there's no conversation to be had. It's just accepted.
So what's the answer then, Anna? What do we do? $1,000 question.
So in a real nutshell, we have to be aware of our own baggage as parents or as adults when we're with kids. We have to know what's ours, and we have to be mindful of what we do and don't want to pass on. And what's ours comes from a whole host of things, what we saw growing up, from diet culture, from your food heritage, emotional eating, mental health, trauma, it's cultural. So there are so many factors that go into our relationship with food. And then it is how we work through that so we don't pass those on unwittingly. And then it's about being food neutral with children. So giving all foods their names, their proper names, rather than going, that's super healthy, that's rubbish, that's crap, that's junk, that's bad. Those words are pejorative. They're loaded with value and emotion. And that sets people up to think of food as an emotional thing, whereas actually at the most fundamental level, it's not emotional. We need it to survive. Hunger is a survival mechanism. Liking sweet foods is evolutionary, because when we were hunter-gathering and we went to seek food, the sweet foods are usually the most nutrient-dense and they're the least likely to be poisonous. And so there are so many factors again. So being food neutral is incredibly important. Helping your children to understand when they're full, when they're hungry, different types of hunger, helping them tune into their body and trust their body. And that means you have to trust them to trust their body too. Making meal times really enjoyable, because when stress and anxiety comes into play with meals and with food, that can lead to fussy eating. It can lead to distress associated with food. So really at meal times, the focus needs to be on everything else other than the food, the bonding, games, fun, laughter, whatever it may be. And that's not possible at every meal, but if that's your mindset, it makes it easier. And so those are the ways that you can really set up a good relationship with food, and then kind of challenging the diet culture beliefs. So if your child comes home saying, well, this is so-and-so says this is, my teacher says this is really unhealthy, you might want to have a conversation about that and say, actually, everything in moderation is good. And in this house, we believe something a little bit different, so that you challenge it, and then help your child to understand that their worth is based on who they are as a human being and not how they look. And then there's all the other stuff about understanding the developmental stages of eating and understanding, what signs and symptoms might lead or might be indicative of an eating disorder. But fundamentally, if you have those foundational components in place that create a good relationship with food, it is protective against eating disorders.
And what are the developmental stages of eating? Is it, because I was always brought up to think every 7 years you change. Is that how it works with food?
If you go to babyhood, then it's kind of every week you change.
Oh, wow.
Well, yeah, because if you think, baby comes out with the ability to suck, usually, unless they're very premature, but a baby comes out able to suck. That's the primary reflex. But over the next, few weeks and months, that changes. Their alertness changes. What they can do with their tongue and their mouth changes. And, at the stage that they're able to swallow something more solid, when you start to wean, that changes. And then as they get teeth and they're able to, bite, that changes. So all of these stages, they can't really be rushed, because it's about child development, physiological development and emotional development. Playing with food is a developmental stage. It's learning about texture and the touch and the different nature of different foods, the smells and the tastes. So that very messy stage is really important to allow your child to go through. And then as they kind of get to kind of toddlerhood, they sometimes become a bit fussier. It's not unusual for them to become fussier, having been great eaters, because again, they're developing and they're understanding, but they're also working out what they like, what their tastes are, and tastes change. And then as they go through middle childhood and later childhood and into adolescence, there's more development, less maybe in terms of the physiology of early infancy when the whole mouth is developing and the muscles are developing, but in terms of emotional responses. And then when it's adolescence, the body changes, the brain changes, and food can be used to manage emotions. And that's what we really don't want. So there are a lot of developmental stages. I've done a whistle stop through some of the key ones just now, but in my book, How to Talk to Children About Food, in that, I go through all of them, kind of 0 to 3 months, 3 to 6 months, 6 to 12 months, and outline them so that parents and adults who read it kind of understand just how much is involved.
Yeah. And I think you mentioned sort of emotional eating and I always find it's different. Like a friend of mine, I'll give you an example. A friend of mine, if she gets stressed or anxious or upset or whatever, she can't eat. She says, my stomach's in knots, and she doesn't eat for days. I'm the opposite. If I get upset, I comfort eat, which is not good either. But is that sort of behaviour learned from your parents? Is it genetic? Is it just the way your makeup is?
It's a real mix, and it's very individual. So there is a reality that when we get quite stressed, there's physiology that goes in the body. That means that our digestive system, goes on the back burner, and it's very common to feel nauseous and knotted and have kind of gastro symptoms. And that might make, for some people, eating uncomfortable. So that is physiological. But also, if when you were a child, you were rewarded with food or punished using food. So, you've been so good today, here's some chocolate, or no pudding for you tonight because you've been naughty. Then children who were rewarded or punished with food tend to reward and punish themselves with food into adulthood. So there are individual differences that come from childhood. We're all wired a little bit differently, but you know what? Emotional eating sometimes is normal. Sometimes I think most people overeat occasionally. If you go out for a celebratory meal or something where you have birthday cake, you may not always be biologically hungry for the last mouthful of birthday cake, but you're connecting with people and you're socializing, and it's a joyful time and you're celebrating, and you might eat a little bit more, and that's completely normal. So again, there's a whole range to all of this.
Yeah, mentioning the birthday cake, as far as I'm concerned, I wouldn't have been allowed to. When I was growing up, myself and my sister were not allowed to leave the table until every scrap of food had gone off our plate. And sometimes we'd be there for hours. And that wasn't my dad being cruel. We've spoken about it since, but he was of a generation where they didn't have much, you know what I mean? And you couldn't waste food, and he wanted us to be healthy. But it has affected me because now I can't stand it. If food, I eat fast, because if food goes cold, it takes me back there and I just can't eat it. It's funny, isn't it?
Well, it's that's what happens to us all, and it just depends. That's the point. That's our parents' legacy being passed to us, and us passing it to our kids, and that's why the foundation of a good relationship with food is so important, because that relationship is a lifelong relationship. And so what we learn as children, unless we become aware and we try really hard to break the cycle, carries on into adulthood, and then we gift it unintentionally down the generations.
Yeah, a vicious circle, I suppose. Well, it's interesting, and we've obviously only just done a whistle-stop tour, as Dr. Anna said, so there's much more in the book, which our listeners can buy right now from our website, TRE.radio. It's called How to Talk to Children About Food, a new approach to managing food feelings, fussiness and eating disorders. It's based for ages 0 to 16. And Dr. Anna, do you have your own website as well?
I do. It's www.dranna.co.uk.
Simple as that. Well, I appreciate your time today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye.